Welcome everybody to the Alyosha Society. Let's see, what is it that we do here? Oh yeah, we pursue truth, beauty, and goodness through great literature. Welcome back everybody. This is video number 2 out of 10 total videos on Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. Just to remind you where we are on the videos. Let's get these all set up here for you. There you go. If you didn't get a screenshot in the last video, there you have it. Lots of intro. And as I said in the previous video, also with my cool green Frankenstein shirt on, we have a truck load of material to cover in this video. So be sure that you read, at the very least, the opening letters. That is just, it's everything before volume 1, okay? I think it's 4 letters that a guy named Robert Walton is writing to his sister Margaret. Be sure you read those before you get into video number 3. Quick recap. You've already seen this. Just wanted to remind you, I put myself back in the toolbox. These are all the tools that we're going to be kind of, right now, I mean, I've already given you these tools, right? So they're already in the toolbox. It's just that we're going to be pulling them out and learning how to use them. The elements of the plot, we're going to be doing more on historical context, although we did do most of that in the previous video. Today's going to focus more on Mary Shelley. So it's going to be more biographical context, but we're also going to hit those genre questions in this video. And we'll be talking about literary devices as we go through the novel. So let's see, where are we headed from here? Life and Times of Mary Shelley. All right, let's get me out of the way and let's go over here. Okay, now, first of all, she was born in 1797, London, England, and this is very significant. Her mother died from complications from giving birth 10 days after little Mary Godwin was her maiden name, was born. And Mary Shelley, that is, Mary always wrestled with this. She always struggled with, was my mother's death my fault? I mean, I don't even know what it would be like to be in that position, but it's an odd and difficult thing to struggle with, isn't it? 10 days. So she obviously, now she knew her mother very well, but that's only because she devoured her mother's written works. Mary Wollstonecraft was a scholar. She was an impressive intellectual of her day. She is often called the founder of feminism. I mean, that's huge. So she had written extensively. And Mary Godwin, I should say, at this point, read everything. She had a big, huge portrait of her mother. She really idolized her mother, and she wanted to live up to whatever she thought her mother wanted her to be. At the same time, her father was no slouch. William Godwin was a well-known political philosopher of the day, very well-read, highly intellectual. And so these were the parents that Mary Shelley comes from. So, maybe in light of that, maybe it's not so shocking that she writes this amazing novel when she's 19 years old. So, but this is a huge event. William Godwin was heartbroken, angry, disgusted, whatever. At 17 years old, his daughter, little Mary Godwin, runs off to Europe with Percy Shelley. 17 years old, with her stepsister Claire. And that whole 3-person relationship was just kind of awkward and weird. But I don't even know if I've gotten to the worst part of it yet. He was still married to another woman. Yeah, Percy Shelley was married to a woman named Harriet, who later ended up committing suicide. Yikes. It's like we already kind of have the beginnings of a Gothic story here. Yeah. William Godwin, her father, was crushed by this. He was angry about it. There was tremendous tension between them, which some literary critics believe shows up in certain elements of Frankenstein. More on that to come. So she's 17 years old. The next year, now remember, they're not married. They're not married. They're going to get married, but they're not married yet. 1815, they have a daughter who dies. She's born prematurely. Now, look at this. She's 18 years old. 18 years old. She's hanging out with a dude who was married to someone else. They have a child together. The child dies. Now, in 1816, they do get married. And she gives birth to a son named William. We'll talk about him later. And she begins writing Frankenstein because another guy who had joined them, also very famous. You've probably heard of Lord Byron, one of the most famous English poets of all time. And he was hanging out with them. And he came to them one day and said, hey, I've got an idea. Let's have a little competition. Let's each of us write a ghost story and see who can write the best ghost story. Well, guess what? Yeah. Nobody pays any attention to the ghost stories written by the guys. This is what Mary Shelley produced. She wrote Frankenstein as a result of Lord Byron's proposal that they write a ghost story. It's going to end up getting published 2 years later. But in this year, remember, she's still only 19 years old. She's already lost a child. And she and Percy Shelley get married. The next year, she gives birth to a daughter. She names the daughter Clara. The year after that, Frankenstein is published, but anon. Who's anon? That means anonymously. Look, not only were women not expected to write anything in the early 19th century, in fact, many women writers at this time period used a name that sounded more like a male, because women, that wasn't proper for a woman to do things. She's supposed to stay home and do house, domestic duties. So she published it anonymously. She couldn't put her name on it. And then as a result, a lot of folks thought that Percy Shelley was the author. Percy Shelley was a writer himself. You can buy his works, his poetry and so forth. It's very, very well recognized and widely read. So here we are, 1818. She's 21 years old. She's already lost a child. She has 2 other children. She publishes this amazing work that we call Frankenstein. Now, the next few years are going to be brutal for Mary Shelley. William, who was born back in 1816, dies. She gives birth to another child. She names him Percy Jr. Okay? It just keeps coming. Percy drowns in 1822. Not Percy Jr. Her husband, Percy Shelley, drowns. She's 25 years old. She has already lost 2 children. She's already given birth to multiple children. She's published a work that will become one of the most, well-known works of the 19th century and beyond. And her husband dies in a tragic, it was a boating accident. 25 years old. Now, about a decade later, she published a revised version of Frankenstein. She changed quite a bit of it. I'm going to talk a little bit later today about what the critics said about Frankenstein when it first came out in 1818. So she changed it considerably. And just as a reminder, friends, we are using, I think you can see it, the 1818 version, the original. And it's the Penguin version. This is the one so page numbers and everything. So if you're able to get that. So here we go. Now from 1831, for the next 20 years, Mary Shelley writes a number of novels. And I haven't read all of them. I have read some of them. My favorite is a novel called The Last Man. It's pretty fascinating. In fact, right now, I don't know what time it is that you're watching this video, but while I'm making this video, it is July of 2022, and we're still kind of in the middle of a global pandemic. Well, that's what her book is about. Mary Shelley tells a story of a pandemic that basically wipes out humanity, and there's one guy left on the planet. It's a pretty fascinating story, especially reading it in the middle of a pandemic. So anyway, sorry, I got off track. For the next 20 years, Mary Shelley cranks out one work after another, and then she has a brain tumor, and she dies at the age of 53 in 1851. So she dies right in the middle of the 19th century. There you have it, guys. Pause, take a screenshot. These are some of the important events. But what do you draw out of this? Okay, that's going to help you understand this better. There's a lot here. There's a lot of death. There's a lot of pain. There's a relationship with a father that's very strained. There's a mother that she never knew. There is a very close association with death at an unusually young age. A husband who dies in a tragic accident. Guys, these are not the kind of things that would normally happen to someone who's, again, 25 years old when her husband drowns. So we're going to come back to a lot of this. And in fact, I want to talk now, I want to kind of just sort of get you thinking a little bit about what I'm going to call the making of Mary Shelley. How does, sometimes people use the expression, what makes you tick? What is it that makes you who you are? Well, her mother was Mary Wollstonecraft. And even though Mary Wollstonecraft died 10 days after Mary was born, she had a huge influence on Mary Shelley's life because Mary Shelley read everything her mom wrote. She took it all in and she wanted to live it all out. And that is a very feminist, we might use the word progressive, but it was definitely not, and a whole bunch of nots, not a Christian worldview at all. So that's the first thing, the making of Mary Shelley. Secondly, she was living in a time when women were not highly respected really for their minds, for their intellect, for their writing abilities. It was mainly just domestic felicity. Stay home, take care of the house, have children, and that's it. So, she's living at a time when women were viewed as being weak and fickle and incapable of anything. And you know what? I think she wants to prove that it's not true. I think she kind of does. The fact that she ran off with a married man and her father rejected her as a result of that. You see, guys, you got to keep that kind of thing in mind. Guys, that is baggage. That is emotional baggage, pain, rejection, alienation. Think about that. That's what's going on up here with Mary Shelley. What else? The fact that she lost these children, in childbirth. And I don't know if you do have the same version I have. If you go all the way to the very, 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 in fact, it's not even numbered. It's so far to the end, but it would be page 259. Mary Shelley's diary. This is an entry she made in her diary. She was haunted by the idea of bringing the dead back to life. Do you see why Mary Shelley would write a book about bringing the dead back to life? She lost children. She lost her husband. I mean, that's something that she might have thought about that you and I wouldn't have thought about because we didn't experience that. Her mother had died just days after she was born. She longed to be reunited with Wollstonecraft. In 1815, her first child died just a few days after she was born. Mary was 17. And so in her diary, she recorded a dream. Again, it's in this version if you have it. Sunday, March the 19th. Dream that my little baby came to life again. That it had only been cold and that we rubbed it before the fire and it lived. awake and find no baby. Now, guys, agree or disagree with her worldview, that breaks my heart. I have 5 children. I can't fathom the pain that a parent would feel from losing a child. And so she had these, I guess you'd call them more like nightmares, really, especially when you wake up. And she thought, oh, I brought my child is back, but no. And then finally, she was surrounded by the intelligentsia of her day. Again, not only her mother's writings, but William Godwin, her father. She devoured his library. She was hanging out with people like Lord Byron, for Pete's sake. I mean, that would sort of be like living in Shakespeare's day, and Shakespeare's like one of your pals. When you put all of these things together, the making of Mary Shelley, I think this is going to make a lot more sense to you. Yeah, it really did to me. Another thing that I think is going to help is getting to know this guy that she hung out with until she was 25 years old when he died, Percy Shelley. What was he like? Well, first of all, let me recommend a book to you that I have found tremendously enjoyable. There's a picture of it there on the slide. It's called Romantic Outlaws. And it's an unusual book. It's what I guess I would call a double biography. It's not just a biography, it's a biography of both Mary Wollstonecraft, Mary Shelley's mother, and Mary Shelley. So what Charlotte Gordon is doing in this book is alternating back and forth. She'll do one chapter on the daughter, then a chapter on the mother, and she bounces back and forth. But in the book, she describes Percy Shelley. And I'll warn you ahead of time, it ain't pretty. This is Percy as a little boy. I'm on page 85. You can see it right there. As a little boy, he shrugged off the limits that his father had tried to place on him. Rules like no playing with snakes or fire. He ran away when he was disciplined. He chopped down his father's precious fir trees, poked holes in the ceiling and to find fairies. He used gunpowder to blow up the playground fence and his schoolroom desk. He accidentally set the butler on fire and terrorized his sisters with ghost stories and experiments. His younger sister, Helen, remembered how he would collect his little sisters and place them hand in hand around the nursery table to be electrified. One night, while tinkering with electricity, you see the focus on electricity here. What if electricity could bring back the dead, could reanimate a corpse? That was actually a big question that was on people's minds. Oh, that makes sense. The flames were put out. He ignited his parents' baronial estate. So he caught his parents' house on fire. But the young Shelley, rather than being chastened, was disappointed that he had not destroyed the entire house. By the time that Shelley met Mary, his enthusiasm for experiments had only grown, not lessened with age. You see where Mary probably got some of her thoughts for Frankenstein. Had not lessened with age as his father had hoped. Like most intellectuals of the era, Shelley regarded science as a branch of philosophy, or sometimes even an offshoot of the occult. Ooh, that's interesting. He searched for spirits as avidly as he stared through a solar microscope. He studied chemistry even as he sought to summon the devil. One night, he sneaked into a church to spend the night in the burial vault, hoping that he would see ghosts. Shelley's scientific explorations were of great interest to Mary, and since she too was intrigued by the idea that electricity or electrical fire could spark, birth, animate the inanimate, and bring the dead back from the grave. Shelley applied his powers of invention to coming up with a plan of escape. I don't know if this is important. It would be a grand adventure. Okay, yeah. So, wow. That is a snapshot of Percy Shelley. Okay, now once again, you should be putting these things together. Okay, you put these things together. Go back to the making of Mary Shelley. These are all things that happened to her. Then add to that what this guy was like that she hung out with until she was 25 years old. Now, when Frankenstein was published in 1818, it was met with mostly disgust. Okay, here's some actual comments from early reviews from critics. It's horrible and disgusting. The author must be as mad as the hero. The hero, of course, being Dr. Victor Frankenstein. Frankenstein is, quote, hostile to religion. We'll talk about that as we go through. We'll answer the question, is it truly? And folks said, there is no way that a woman could have written this work of horror and violence. It's a horror story. I'm bracing you and warning you for that. If you've never read Frankenstein before, okay, fair enough. You're going to be the critic. You're going to make your own judgments. I'm just telling you, these are what some early reviewers said about Frankenstein. Now, first of all, the title is not Frankenstein. There's more to the title. It's called Frankenstein or the Modern Prometheus. Well, first of all, let's talk a little bit about the Frankenstein part. Where did that part of the title come from? Of course, it's Victor's last name in the story, but where did she get that? Well, she was traveling through Europe with Percy Shelley. They were in Germany, and I'm going to read a portion from Romantic Outlaws that kind of explains it. One day, early in September, when the barge had paused at Gernsheim, a few miles north of Mannheim, she and Shelley stole away from Jane. They strolled past the gabled cottages along the cobbled streets and out into the surrounding countryside. And in the distance, against the sky, they could make out the towers of a picturesque castle named Frankenstein. Oh, interesting. There was a disturbing legend associated with the castle. In exchange for a few coins, a villager told them the story. A notorious alchemist, an alchemist is someone who believed that they could take certain metals and turn them into gold. Yeah, that'd be nice, wouldn't it? Named Conrad Dippel, had been born there in 1673. Dippel was obsessed with finding a cure for death and conducted these dark, macabre experiments, digging up graves to steal body parts and grinding the bones into dust that he mixed with blood and administered to corpses in an attempt to bring them back to life. Of course, he died a failure, leaving the question unresolved, is it possible to bring the dead back to life? So that's the story associated with this castle in Germany. So appropriately, Mary Shelley decides to call her novel or name her novel after the castle. And of course, the protagonist, Victor Frankenstein. Remember, along those lines, a lot of people get mixed up and think that the monster is called Frankenstein, but the monster doesn't have a name, like Jeff or Billy or Bob. The monster is just called the monster, or you could call him the monster of Frankenstein. But Dr. Frankenstein is the doctor who builds Frankenstein from dead body parts. Yeah, we'll get to that. But what about Prometheus? Why is it called Frankenstein or the Modern Prometheus? You may be a little rusty on your Greek mythology, but Prometheus was the old Titan god. Remember, the Titans were like the parents, I guess you would say, of the Olympian gods. And Prometheus was the one who, at least in one myth, he stole fire / technology to give it to humans. In another version of the myth, he actually created humanity. So Dr. Frankenstein is a modern Prometheus in that way. So kind of makes sense. Why would she connect Prometheus to this story? I think it's obvious. There's the creation aspect, and there's also the technology aspect, fire. Okay, what else is going to help us better understand this novel? Well, Mary Shelley's obsession with graveyards. When Mary was just a child, I mean, you know, how could she help to turn out in such a way that she would write a ghost story like this? Well, her father, William Godwin, used to take her to her mother's grave tombstone and read the words on the tombstone, and that is how he taught her how to read. Now, back in the old days, you know, in a lot of the history of the West, people used the Bible to teach little kids how to read. Not William Godwin. William Godwin takes his daughter out to the graveyard, and they are looking at tombstones, and he taught her to read from her mother's tombstone. What else gives us insight into her obsession? Well, her mother's grave was a place that she was kind of obsessed with. Not only did her father take her there, but she took Percy there. And they spent a lot of time talking, getting to know each other, as the case may be. I want to read another passage to you from Romantic Outlaws. Matters were growing more and more serious, and Mary took Shelley to her sacred spot, her mother's grave in St. Pancras churchyard. This became their favorite place to be alone. Here they read aloud from books that they carried with them, often from Mary's mother's volumes. They discussed different topics. His wife, Harriet, I mean, how weird is that? Their father and so forth. They were both intrigued by dreams and visions and the question of what happens to you after death. Was there rebirth? Was there an afterlife? Did Mary's mother linger somewhere as a spirit or a ghost? So they used to go to Mary's Wollstonecraft's grave and talk about all these things. For the first 6 weeks of their relationship, they maintained a strict physical distance during these meetings. For them, language was the passionate medium, but later on, Shelley would explain that he fell in love with Mary there, and they may have even consummated their relationship on this spot. Let me see if there's anything else. Page 80. Yeah, finally on June 27th, Mary took matters into her own hands. She stood in front of her mother's gravestone, looked straight into Shelley's eyes, and did what no young woman was supposed to do. She declared that she loved him and threw herself into his arms. And as Shelley remembered it, Mary was inspired, quote, by a spirit that sees into the truth of things, the sublime and rapturous moment when she confessed herself mine, who had so long been hers in secret, cannot be painted to mortal imaginations. So she confesses her love to Percy Shelley, the atheist, and that's why they were struggling with these things. You know, they weren't opening God's word to see, hey, I wonder what happens to us after we die. No, that wasn't an authority for them. They weren't raised in Christian homes, and they did not have a Christian worldview. Okay, continuing on. What else are we doing here, guys, with elements of our plot and historical context, biographical genre questions, literary device? Elements of the plot. Now, I'm not going to ruin things here. All I want to say to you is look for it. Look for the opening, the intro. We're going to be talking about what a frame within a frame story is. Next video. Try to identify the rising action. We'll eventually talk about whether or not there's a climactic moment followed by falling action. And then how is this thing resolved in the end? Now remember, we have our genre questions as well. But we have two different genres here. We have, it's an epistolary novel, but it's also a Gothic novel. What is epistolary? Well, epistolary just means that it is a novel written as letters from one person to another. That's what the whole novel is. You may not have realized that. We'll get into that more later. But you want to ask these questions. Who is doing the writing and to whom? Why are they writing to each other? What's their relationship? And can you get a sense of how much time is going by between each correspondence and also in the whole novel? I mean, are we talking about, 6 weeks or 6 years or longer? Another interesting question, I think, is it secretive? It just so happens that it's not here. But as you're reading other epistolary novels, that's an interesting question. Are they trying to keep their correspondence secret? This is another one that I find really interesting. Are they being truthful with one another? Now, there may be some epistolary novels where you can't really tell if they are, but it's a fascinating question to ask. Screenshot. All right, get this. As we go through, we're gonna identify. So remember, it's also a Gothic novel. Oh, wait a second. Wait a second. Do you even remember what a Gothic novel is? I know we did this with Northanger Abbey. So just a quick recap. Gothic, dark, horror, ghosts, supernatural, scary, maybe a frail girl who needs to be rescued. There could be some torture in some kind of a dungeon, but there's definitely got to be some thunder and lightning. Okay, I think you guys should have a pretty good feel of the Gothic. And a novel that Mary Shelley was probably very familiar with would have been Anne Radcliffe's The Mysteries of Udolpho. She was living right at the exact same time as Jane Austen, and this is one of the most popular novels of the day. All right, so let's transition now. What are our Gothic genre questions? Okay, I want you to begin with what's the theme of the novel? And then I want you to get to, okay, now why would this author choose the Gothic genre to get that particular point across? Now, I believe that the Gothic genre is a valid genre. I know some of you may be thinking, oh, this sounds kind of dark and kind of wicked. And no, just hang on. I think the Gothic genre can be a valid genre in that it may give us insights into the sinful nature of man. Now, look, I'm not talking about Texas Chainsaw Massacre, cut 'em up, blood, serial killer. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about a well-crafted Gothic story. That's different. So watch for, commentary on the nature of man. One of the reasons we're going to compare these two is because we have a Gothic story written by a Christian and a Gothic story written by a non-Christian. I think we're just going to have a lot of fun comparing and contrasting them. How does the author's worldview impact the way that you view and interpret the Gothic themes? That's going to be really important, guys. Just trying to give you all kinds of tools for the toolbox. Now, if you're not really sure, like I've never heard of this epistolary, yeah, you know what, guys? There's actually quite a number of very well-known epistolary novels. I'm just putting a handful of them up here. The Color Purple, very, very popular novel these days, right now. Marilyn Robinson, who wrote Gilead. The Screwtape Letters. That's an epistolary novel. Dostoevsky wrote an epistolary novel. So what I want you to do is I want you to be thinking as you go through this story, how is it that the author uses the epistolary format to accomplish something that she might not have been able to accomplish in just a regular, once upon a time format? Okay, how does the epistolary aspect of it enhance what the author is doing? Yeah, sorry guys. I don't know exactly how long this video was, but I have a feeling that it went a little long. I told you we had a truckload of stuff to cover, but this is our final of the introduction videos. We're going to get right into the story in video number 3, opening letters. So friends, be sure that you read those opening letters. It's not a lot of reading, like, I don't know, 18 or 20 pages, something like that. But get those opening letters read, or go ahead and go beyond that. Before you check out video number 3, see you then.